is CNN Breaking News.
Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation now moving closer to President Trump's inner circle. Mueller's team is scheduled to interview several senior White House officials in the coming weeks. CNN Justice correspondent Jessica Schneider is here with the latest. Jessica, this investigation is gaining momentum.
It is, Jim, but there is still really a lot of work left for the special counsel to do. Those interviews of key White House staff, those will happen in the next few weeks. And now we know that the British publicist who set up the Trump Tower meeting with a Russian lawyer and Donald Trump Jr., he is ready to talk. In addition to that, there could be more bombshells to come if hints from witnesses already interviewed are any indication. Tonight, indications that new revelations could soon emerge from the special counsel's probe. The Washington Post reports investigators are asking witnesses about foreign contacts and meetings that haven't yet been made public. The investigators are specifically focused on President Trump's fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and his foreign contacts, according to the Post.
Right here.
Flynn is under scrutiny for the undisclosed lobbying he did during the presidential campaign on behalf of the Turkish government, according to sources. The special counsel is also asking about the possibility that Flynn was part of discussions in a plot that was never carried out, seeking the removal, possibly by force, of a Turkish cleric, Fethullah Gulen, living in exile in the U.S. The special counsel will be interviewing key White House staffers in the coming weeks, including Communications Director Hope Hicks, who has been a crucial part of the president's inner circle since his campaign began in June 2015, and White House counsel Don McGahn. Meanwhile, the British publicist who arranged the now infamous July 2016 meeting at Trump Tower between a Russian lawyer and Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort is now breaking his silence. Rob Goldstone tells the Sunday Times of London that he has accepted special counsel Mueller's invitation for an interview, saying he feels it's time for me to explain what happened, and dismissing any suggestion he was part of a Russian plot to influence the election. I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That doesn't mean that maybe there wasn't any Russian interference or Trump campaign collusion in other ways. I don't know, but I'm sure I wasn't part of it. And no date has been set just yet for Goldstone's interview with Mueller's team, but Goldstone is insisting in that interview as well that he didn't mean to say outright that the Russian government supported candidate Trump when he wrote that email to Donald Trump Jr. Instead, Goldstone now says that he was speaking generally about the adoration he'd seen for Donald Trump in Moscow, and said the misinterpretation was likely the result of his rushed email. Jim?
Story gets more interesting every day. CNN Jessica Schneider, thank you very much. Let's get more on all of this with Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke of Texas. He's vice ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee and a candidate for the U.S. Senate against Ted Cruz. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman. What does it say to you that there could be even more meetings that have yet to come to light? The White House makes it sound as if, their legal team makes it sound as if all of the meetings we've heard about, that's all we're going to get at this point. But it sounds like there may be more meetings to talk about.
You know, these most recent revelations underscore the importance of Special Counsel Mueller's investigation and ensuring its independence and his authority to follow those facts as far as they go, as high up as they go, and ensuring that we have accountability and justice. I mean, the very essence of our democracy is at stake. This thing that has distinguished us from so much of the rest of the world for the last 230 years, that explains so much of our greatness, is under attack and is open to question. And we have to be able to resolve those questions. And I have great confidence in Special Counsel Mueller, and I want to make sure that he's able to see this investigation through all the way.
And based on what you've seen so far, Congressman, do you think that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia?
They certainly tried to collude with Russia. I think that Special Counsel Mueller is still following those facts to determine how effective they were in their ability to do that. And then I hope that he's going to continue to follow those following President Trump's swearing in his attempt to obstruct justice and the investigation then ongoing from the FBI director that was later fired. So there's certainly the evidence that there was an attempt to collude with Russia.
And I want to switch to Roy Moore and what's happening with the Senate race down in Alabama, Congressman. We still have not heard President Trump really comment on Roy Moore, and the White House appears to be fumbling around for a consistent message on all of this. Let's listen to the various lines we've heard from the Trump administration officials on this in recent days.
We want the votes in the Senate to get this tax
this tax bill through.
I think you should certainly be able to infer by the fact that he has not gone down to support Roy Moore his discomfort in doing so.
If the allegations are true, he should step aside.
He thinks that the voters of Alabama should decide. I think that's probably the most common sense way to look at it. He doesn't know who to believe.
What do you make of the White House position on this, Congressman?
It's interesting. You have this extraordinary bipartisan consensus on Roy Moore in the Senate. You have the majority leader, Mitch McConnell. You have the minority leader, Chuck Schumer, and just about every single senator, even Ted Cruz, although he was one of the last to come to this conclusion, have withdrawn their support or disavowed Roy Moore and are vowing that they will not seat him or eject him from the Senate should he be elected. I think it's incredibly important that we have leadership from the very top. And I think it's important that the people of this country know that someone who, as a grown man, preyed on children cannot be elevated to one of the highest positions of public trust in the land. And I think we're still waiting for that from the White House.
And Congressman, you probably have seen this. Another woman has come forward against Senator Al Franken, saying that he grabbed her behind while they took a picture together. This was while he was a sitting U.S. Senator. In your view, what is the appropriate response at this point? Should Senator Franken step down?
You know, on this one again, members of the Senate from both parties have said that Senator Franken should be referred to the Ethics Committee. Senator Franken himself has agreed with that conclusion. He has apologized. He's acknowledged this. He's owned it. And I think that investigation should be allowed to take place. But certainly, this kind of behavior is inappropriate and unacceptable and unbecoming of a member of the U.S. Senate. And I certainly hope that this investigation is allowed to take its full course. And whatever the findings and the consequences are, I know that Senator Franken and the Senate agree that that's the best path for this to take.
And not to put you on the spot here, Congressman, why is it okay for everybody to say that Roy Moore should be gone, but not Al Franken?
You know, in the case of Roy Moore, you have someone who, as a grown man, was preying on girls in his community, sexually abusing and assaulting these girls and young women. In the case of President Trump, you have someone who was boasting about sexual assault and preying on women and using his position of power to try to dominate women physically, boasting about it, caught on a microphone. In the case of Senator Franken, you have someone who was what he did was unacceptable, but I think in a different level of behavior. Unacceptable still, but the kind of sexual assault that you had President Trump brag about, the kind of predation that you saw from Roy Moore, a completely different level.
And Congressman, I want to get your reaction to the news that we heard this afternoon. The Justice Department saying it will sue to block the AT&T Time Warner merger. Are you concerned that President Trump's personal views about CNN, about the media at large, might have influenced that decision, even though the Department of Justice says that's not the case?
Yeah. I mean, I think we should begin with some genuine concerns about the increasing concentration of power and wealth in this country. And so I want to make sure that we look at all the facts of this case before we judge it. But what certainly complicates it is someone like President Trump calling the press the enemy of the people instead of the best protection against tyranny, of circulating memes on Twitter of people who have CNN logos on their heads being body slammed by wrestlers or hit by freight trains. This calls into question the motives behind this action, and we shouldn't even be having to have this conversation as serious an issue as this is and as potentially significant as this merger is. So I want to make sure that we give this case its due, read and understand all the facts, but it's too bad that President Trump, through his conduct, has forced us to even bring this question up, whether this is personally motivated on the part of the president.
Okay, Congressman, stand by. We have more news to discuss. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
We're back with Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke of Texas, vice-ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. We want to talk to him about this concern over President Trump's authority to order the launch of nuclear weapons. But first, Congressman, let's get more on this story from our CNN Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Barbara, some blunt talk about this from a top general in charge of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Fascinating.
It is fascinating, Jim. What's so unusual here is not necessarily what this general said, but when he was asked a question in public, he was remarkably candid about the answer.
And tremendous respect.
President Trump designating North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism also has a military objective.
The North Korean regime must be lawful. It must end its unlawful nuclear and ballistic missile development.
The president's hot rhetoric about North Korea's nuclear weapons.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Causing deep worry he might suddenly order a nuclear weapons launch.
We are concerned that the President of the United States is so unstable, is so volatile, has a decision-making process that is so quixotic that he might order a nuclear weapons strike that is wildly out of step with U.S. national security interests.
For 20 years,
General John Hyten, the respected four-star in charge of U.S. nuclear weapons, says if he got an illegal order from President Trump to launch nuclear weapons, he would not follow it.
I provide advice to the president. He'll tell me what to do, and if it's illegal, guess what's going to happen?
You say no.
I'm going to say, Mr. President, that's illegal. And guess what he's going to do? He's going to say, what would be legal? And we'll come up with options of a mix of capabilities to respond to whatever the situation is. And that's the way it works. It's not that complicated.
The weapon must be proportional to the threat, especially because nuclear weapons can kill tens of thousands of people.
I think the general's remarks were very forceful. They were very plain spoken, and they were very blunt. And frankly, they were also very refreshing. It's very important, I think, for the American public to understand the types of safeguards, the types of security measures we put around our nuclear arsenal and our nuclear strike capability.
Commanders continue to say the obligation is on them to not obey an illegal order.
It might surprise you if I told you I have been in situations in combat where we have had to take orders that were given to us and go back to our commanders and said, hey, the lawyers say this might not be legal to do these things.
All of this taking on more urgency because the U.S. intelligence community and the South Koreans believe it is possible sometime in 2018 the North Koreans will have the ability to launch a long-range missile with a warhead on top that could be aimed at the United States. Jim?
This is becoming a critical issue. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thank you very much. I want to get back to Congressman O'Rourke. Congressman, how troubling is it for you that a top general in this capacity has to answer to these fears of an illegal order of a nuclear strike? Barbara and I were reporting last week that there are members of Congress who are concerned about this, even a major U.S. NATO partner who's concerned about this. Do his remarks put you more at ease, make you more worried? What do you make?
They're really encouraging. I feel like at this time, perhaps unlike any other in our lifetimes, the institutions of this country are under significant stress. I mean, we talked about our very democracy earlier, the ballot box, the judiciary, and now our U.S. military, and how encouraging that we are more than a match for this test and for this moment. And loved hearing the general's answer. It only increases our confidence in his and those who serve under him ability to meet these challenges.
It sounded like an issue that he's thought about, though, that he's had to process. He had an answer ready to go.
Yeah, because you know, remember, this isn't really Democrats talking about doing this or talking about the president's fitness. You have somebody who is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, Senator Bob Corker, who questions the president's very fitness, his competence, his, as the chairman's, confidence in the president's ability to make these decisions. And there has to be some check on that. And the greatest check, of course, is the Constitution, which vests the power to make war on other people in the United States Congress. And it's about time that we reclaimed that power. And you're seeing a bipartisan consensus forming right now around the president's use of a first strike capability against North Korea, but also the wars that we're fighting right now in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, and Somalia, and Yemen, and Libya, and all over the world. And it's about time that we once again think through what we're asking American service members to do on behalf of this country, the lives we were asking them to take and the lives that they are putting on the line and far too often losing, especially under this commander-in-chief. It's really time that Congress restore its right and the interests of the people that we represent in making sure that these wars are just, that they're necessary, that we can articulate a definition of victory and what the strategy that underlies that to achieve that. And I think right now in the wars that we're fighting, much less adding new wars like North Korea, we don't have that.
All right, Congressman Beto O'Rourke, thank you very much for joining us. We should point out we also invited Senator Ted Cruz, whose seat you're trying to win, to join us, but he declined. He's enjoying Thanksgiving this week. We hope you do as well. Thank you, Congressman. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Just ahead, a woman who says GOP Senate candidate Roy Moore molested her when she was 14 years old speaks out and gives disturbing new details. Plus, a CNN exclusive report did.
This is CNN Breaking News.
News in the Russia investigation. A source is now telling CNN that the special counsel Robert Mueller is trying to arrange a talk with the British publicist who set up the 2016 Trump Tower meeting between a Russian lawyer and Donald Trump Jr. Our justice correspondent Jessica Schneider is here with more. Jessica, Jared Kushner attended that meeting. Paul Manafort, who has since been indicted, he also attended that meeting.
That's right. It was that publicist, Rob Goldstone, who actually first pitched the meeting to Donald Trump Jr., promising that it would deliver dirt on Hillary Clinton, which Trump Jr. says never actually happened. Investigators want Goldstone, who's overseas, to come to the U.S. to talk to the special counsel. Now, this is an invitation to talk and not a subpoena, and no date has been established yet. Neither Goldstone's attorneys nor the special counsel are commenting on this right now. And the revelation does come at the same time congressional investigators are implying that Jared Kushner has not been forthcoming in handing over key documents.
Tonight, the Senate Judiciary Committee is calling Jared Kushner's disclosures into question, labeling what he's submitted so far incomplete and demanding more documents. The letter sent by Chairman Chuck Grassley and top Democrat Dianne Feinstein points to revelations Monday that Donald Trump Jr. exchanged direct messages with WikiLeaks over Twitter during the campaign. Trump Jr. emailed Jared Kushner and other top campaign officials telling them WikiLeaks had made contact. The committee wants Kushner to hand over the emails. They also want all documents relating to a so-called Russian backdoor overture and dinner invite, Kushner's communications with former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, and any emails relating to his firing. All documents related to his security clearance. Kushner has had to update his forms 3 times for not reporting several meetings with foreign officials, and all communications with Sergei Milian, a Russian businessman who the Washington Post reported is a source for the dossier.
He's definitely apparently omitting documents, and that is the reason that I have long advocated subpoenas for all of the documents. That's the only way we will know whether he's producing all of them. He certainly is doing himself no favor by withholding some, apparently, and I think he ought to be subpoenaed to appear before the committee in open, under oath, at a hearing.
Kushner's lawyer releasing this statement: "We provided the Judiciary Committee with all relevant documents that had to do with Mr. Kushner's calls, contacts, or meetings with Russians during the campaign and transition, which was the request," adding Kushner will continue to voluntarily cooperate.
I don't think it's obstruction. I think he's saying, look, Congress, write us a clear letter, and we'll give you a response to your clear letter.
Meanwhile, the special counsel has subpoenaed the Trump campaign, according to sources. The subpoena seeks more records based on expanded search terms, suggesting investigators believe there are still documents that haven't been handed over. The campaign had provided documents to the special counsel that had also been given to congressional investigators. One source describes the request as covering a large amount of material. The Trump campaign hasn't responded to requests for comment. And in Washington today, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who was forced to recuse himself from the Russia investigation after he initially failed to disclose he met with then Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak twice during the campaign, made light of the situation at the same hotel where he encountered Kislyak at a speech during the campaign.
Is Ambassador Kislyak in the room? Before I get started here, any Russians?
And on Russian television this week, Kislyak joking about the investigation, saying any list of his contacts with Americans would be too long to list during the show.
So some lighthearted comments there. But in the meantime, the special counsel's office is also planning to interview key figures at the White House in the next 2 weeks, according to sources. On the list, White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, also White House counsel Don McGahn. Both were involved in the campaign. Of course, Hope Hicks started with the Trump Organization in 2014. She was a key player in the early days throughout the campaign. And of course, now Wolf within the administration as White House Communications Director.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're going to question her as well about all of this. Thanks very much, Jessica Schneider, reporting. Let's talk about all of this and more with Democratic Congressman John Garamendi of California. He's a key member of the Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Lots to discuss. What do you make of the president's silence when it comes to Roy Moore, the Alabama Republican Senate candidate, while attacking your Democratic colleague, Al Franken?
Oh, I'm reminded of that old saw. Those who live in glass houses shouldn't be throwing stones. That stone bounced right back to him. Obviously, the president has a very, very serious problem with boorish behavior. It's been repeated over and over again. Certainly, his denial that never happened was just pushed aside by 12, 13 women coming forward. It goes on and on. The real problem here is this Russia investigation, in addition to the fact that the president's entire campaign opened the door for very, very bad behavior on the part of many people. It made it possible to be a bully at the top of the heap. You can be a third-grade bully and get away with it if you're president or running for president. That worked its way right down to the kindergarten class that my daughter was teaching last fall, or 2 falls ago, when all of this was going on. In addition to that, I've got 5 daughters, and all of this that's going on about the way in which men across this entire political spectrum, and in the boardroom, and in the legislature, and in Congress, are engaging in these activities. And I just think about my own kids as they were growing up, and even now as adults, and I'm going, it's a good thing that the women are speaking up. It really is. It's going to put a stop to a lot of problems that have occurred over a long period of time.
Let's go through some of the specifics. First of all, should Senator Al Franken resign from his seat?
Well, I think there ought to be a very thorough ethics investigation with all of this information put on the table. I think back to maybe 20 years ago when Senator McConnell led an investigation that actually led to the resignation of a senator. That's the proper way to go at it. Go at it quickly, get it on the table. And if this is a one-off situation, maybe not. But if it's a pattern, as we apparently find in the Roy Moore situation, then it becomes not more serious, but that leads then to a question for the senators as well as for Franken to say, okay, it's time to go. But right now, let's get that investigation up and underway. We don't have to wait until tomorrow. The Senate's will be in session next week after Thanksgiving. Get started on it. Let's get the facts out there.
A lot of Democrats like you, and by the way, including Senator Franken himself, they've also called for an ethics committee investigation into his behavior. But a lot of the critics say that simply is not enough, and that could take a really long time. Remember, Senator Packwood, you're referring to that. That went on, for 30 months?
Well, I think it actually was before the Packwood, but it can be done rapidly. There are people out there, if there are people out there that Senator Franken has done this same boorish behavior with, they should be coming forward also. But that's the appropriate way in this situation. In the case of Alabama, there's another option. It's the election, and it's also an option for Moore to step aside at that point before he becomes a senator. Should he become a senator, I should hope that there would be an immediate ethics investigation that could and probably should lead to his removal from the Senate.
As you point out, this national conversation around sexual assault, sexual harassment, certainly shining a light on a lot of men out there all over the country, especially right now, those working up on Capitol Hill. Several women, as you know, they've come out with their own personal accounts in the last week or so, including some of your Democratic colleagues in the House of Representatives. Bottom line, Congressman, is there a culture based on everything you know and everything you've seen and heard, and you've been in Washington for a while, of sexual misconduct up on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think it's all across the nation. I'll come to Capitol Hill in a moment, but it's all across the nation. Clearly, the president was engaged in this prior to his campaign, so it's been a problem of for women, in which men have used their power, their physical power, their economic power, their position power, to really abuse women in any number of ways, and that has simply got to stop. Has it been a problem on Capitol Hill? The answer is absolutely yes. There's been multi-million dollars spent dealing with allegations that were then payments were made to women for perhaps many, many years. Members of Congress have left office, been forced out of office for inappropriate relationships with House pages. In fact, we no longer have pages because of that situation that occurred 5 or 6 years ago. So yes, it is a problem, but it's not just a problem in the legislative halls. It's a problem of male power over women. And that will end when women finally become equal in every way, in status, in pay, in roles around the nation, and when their stories become the truth and become the decision on whether a man has abused a woman in any number of ways. That's out there. I know that my daughters are looking forward to that day, as is my wife, and I would hope every woman around this nation would simply demand that it happen.
Congressman, there are more developments unfolding. We'll take a quick break, resume our interview right after this.
The Situation Room with Wolf.
The breaking news this hour, a source telling CNN that special counsel Robert Mueller is now trying to arrange talks with British publicist Rob Goldstone, who set up that 2016 Trump Tower meeting in New York City between a Russian lawyer and Donald Trump Jr. We're back with Democratic Congressman John Garamendi of California. He's a member of the Armed Services Committee. Congressman, in the Senate, as you know, lawmakers are now calling on Jared Kushner's, they're saying they're Jared Kushner's disclosures. They're calling them into question. They say the documents he submitted to the Judiciary Committee are incomplete. That's their word. This comes amid the news that Donald Trump Jr. exchanged direct messages with WikiLeaks on Twitter during the campaign, then told Kushner about it over email. The committee wants to see all of those emails. They have not yet been made available. In your view, does Kushner have a pattern now of failing to be fully transparent?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just the emails that you're talking about. You talk about all of the questions that he was supposed to answer in order to get his security clearance. He didn't answer completely. Went back, I think it's been modified 3 times now. And the emails, they're playing the game as old as the hills, and that is, well, we give you what you asked for. You didn't ask for everything. If you ask for, be specific. It's a game. But the game is ultimately going to end here. This drip, drip, drip over the last year is turning into a full torrent of information that's flowing out there. This house of cards is coming down, and in a very, very rapid rate. You take a look at all of these things put together. You look at the Manafort indictments. You look at the guilty plea. You look at the question of Finn. All of this is coming together. It is extremely serious for our very fundamental operation of democracy. There is absolutely no doubt that Russia engaged in the election. We're getting more and more information that the president's campaign and people around the president were in cahoots, working with the Russians, with WikiLeaks and others, reaching out to the Russian ambassador to set up a back channel process of communicating with Russia. It is serious. It is very, very serious. We also know that Russia attempted to interfere with the vote count in multiple states across this nation, trying to hack into the state computers, counting the votes. We've got to protect ourselves. We've got to finish this investigation with Trump, take it wherever it leads. If it leads to impeachment, so be it. But also we need to put in place safeguards, laws, and penalties for people that are involved in these kind of activities, whether they're Russia or anybody else.
Well, it's one thing to attempt to do that if the Russians did, in fact, attempt to do it. Do you have any evidence that they actually succeeded in changing votes?
The states say it didn't happen. I don't know if they did the forensic analysis in sufficient detail with regard to the way in which votes were counted. Given the number of media or soft internet work that was going on by the Russians, all of the tweets, the retweets, all of those activities, more than half of the population read that false news that directly came from the government, from the Russian government. Did that influence them along the way? I can tell you from my own discussions with people very, very close to my family that I kept hearing over and over again those same allegations against Hillary Clinton that came directly from the Russian hackers that were out there and their farm that was putting out all that false information. It was precisely the same things. They kept asking me, is it true? Is it true this? Is it true that? And where were they getting it? They were getting it off the internet. You've got Google, you've got the Facebook, you've got Twitter, all of these folks allowing their platforms to be used to debase, to harm our electoral process. We've got to stop that from happening, and that takes a law in Congress. We must immediately, at the beginning of this next year, turn our attention to writing the law to protect the 2018 election and on into the 2020 presidential election.
Congressman Garamendi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, the U.S. military confronts.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Tonight, the White House is rejecting any comparison between the sexual misconduct allegation against Senator Al Franken and similar accusations made against the president during the campaign. The question coming up after Mr. Trump made a point of tweeting about the Franken incident. Listen to this.
But how is this different? I think in one case specifically, Senator Franken has admitted wrongdoing and the president hasn't. I think that's a very clear distinction.
All right, let's start off with our political specialists. And Abby, I want to get your reaction because you're one of our White House correspondents. Everyone has been waiting for the president to speak publicly about Roy Moore, the allegations against him. Instead, late last night, he tweeted this. The Al Frankenstein, misspelled Frankenstein, picture is really bad, speaks 1,000 words. Where do his hands go in pictures 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 while she sleeps? And to think that just last week he was lecturing anyone who would listen about sexual harassment and respect for women. Leslie Stahl tape. The president is not, recalling the 12, 13 women, we've got some pictures, publicly made accusations against them involving sexual harassment, sexual assault. And he also apparently forgot about that Access Hollywood video in which he openly brags about grabbing women by some private parts, as you know.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear that the president also views this as a different case. He thinks that Al Franken has, as Sarah Huckabee Sanders pointed out, admitted that he did what the victim accused him of doing, and also the photographic evidence. I mean, the president fixated on this image as being part of his response to this, and I think he believes that his allegations are different because these women are making accusations against them, but they don't necessarily have photographs. And he hasn't admitted that he's done anything wrong. At the same time, I think President Trump is in a tough spot here. There's a different sentiment about this in the country right now, even compared to a year ago during the campaign. And people want to know where he stands on these incidents. Why hasn't he spoken up about Roy Moore? And is it just that there's photographic evidence of Al Franken that he thinks that this is a problem?
So how hypocritical, Jeffrey, is it?
Very, very, very. I mean, look, this has become the Sean Hannity presidency. The only response Donald Trump has to any political event now is identical to that of Sean Hannity and Fox News. Sean Hannity said, he went after Al Franken and doesn't discuss the accusations against the president. Defends Judge Moore in Alabama, and that's how, and that's what the White House reaction is. I mean, the idea that Al Franken had the decency to admit how wrong he was, that makes it worse than someone who was caught on tape admitting sexually assaulting women, as the president did. I mean, it's just completely absurd. But he is playing to his base, and that's what the base wants to hear, I guess.
Caitlin?
Well, let's look at it. Okay, so we've got President Trump, who has been accused of sexual assault by, 13 women, I believe, is our count.
And he's denied those vehemently until the White House is still denying those, saying that those women are lying when they talk about that. And then we have the audio of President Trump, then a private citizen, on that Access Hollywood bus, saying that he grabs women the way he wants because he's famous. And then with Al Franken, we've got this woman saying that he forcibly kissed her without her consent. And then we have the photo of him pretending to grope her. Now, Al Franken has said he doesn't remember that kiss the way that she remembers it, essentially denying it, but has apologized for the video. The president has denied those accusations, but he had to acknowledge the audio because we could all listen to it and we could all see this photo of Al Franken. So it's almost, they're very similar. The White House is saying they're very different situations, but we're seeing them, they can deny where there is no photographic or audio evidence. And that's the same situation we're seeing with Al Franken. If we didn't have this photo, would he be denying this?
You know, it's interesting because when those 13 women came forward near the end of the campaign, the president said right after the election, I'm going to sue every one of them. Each one is lying right now. It's been more than a year. There's been no lawsuits.
And it's worth remembering how the president talked about these women. It wasn't, in addition to calling them liars, he also implied that they weren't attractive enough for him to have sexually assaulted them. So, I mean, there were a lot of issues with the way that he dealt with those accusations. I think he never actually had an opportunity to say, you know, to offer his evidence as to why he claims that they didn't happen. I think those cases are really very much unresolved. They are not, I think the election results were what they were, but they are not a vindication of those cases. Those women are still out there. They haven't retracted their cases, and no, the president has not sued.
So the president, and Jeffrey, you're our legal analyst, the president clearly hasn't filed any lawsuits, but these women potentially could file lawsuits for defamation.
Some have. Some have, and those cases are proceeding, including requests for documents about how the president or then candidate Trump planned to respond during the campaign. So it is possible that some of these cases will actually move through the courts. But, you know, if the world has changed and if we now have a different attitude towards women who accuse powerful men of sexual harassment, the single biggest beneficiary of the old system is the man who was a president of the United States. I mean, remember, Billy Bush, who he was talking to on the bus, got fired because he didn't speak up in defense of these women. He got fired, and the other guy on the bus got elected president of the United States. Pretty amazing.
You know, and this debate is going to continue. Let me also point out, Caitlin, I want you to react. The women now and men who are taking another look at Bill Clinton, the president, the former president of the United States. Listen to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York and what she now says.
Is it your view that President Clinton should have stepped down at that time, given the allegations?
Yes, I think that is the appropriate response, but I think things have changed today, and I think under those circumstances there should be a very different reaction. And I think in light of this conversation, we should have a very different conversation about President Trump and a very different conversation about allegations against him.
Clinton's obviously still very powerful in Democratic politics. It puts a lot of Democrats in a rather awkward position right now.
It does, and I think every Democrat should be asked if they agree with her comments there. And her comments are pretty stunning. They would have been really stunning if she had made them a year ago when these sexual assault accusations against Donald Trump were coming out. But now, you know, the nation is seeing this watershed moment where all of these accusations are coming out. And she made that. It was a pretty striking comment from someone who is, you know, presumed to run for president in 2020. And we haven't seen someone make a comment like that about Clinton. But I think it's leading to this moment where all these sexual assault accusations are coming out, that we're really starting to re-examine the way that people responded when Bill Clinton was accused, not only of his affair with Monica Lewinsky, but also his rape and sexual assault and sexual harassment allegations from several other women. I think people are really starting to look at the way that they responded to that and how they acted towards Bill Clinton and how they would have acted towards him now and the way they treated the women back then and if they would be credible people now.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it might have been nice. It might have been nice to hear that from Senator Gillibrand when she was accepting a great deal of help from Bill and Hillary Clinton in running for office. Now that she's in office and doesn't need their help anymore, she's all high and mighty about how awful it was and how he should have been impeached. But, you know, politicians are opportunistic, and, you know, I think we all understand that. But there are degrees of opportunism that can become even too distasteful. And I think Senator Gillibrand may have crossed that line.
Well, I think the driving force behind this is younger women who were very tepid about Hillary Clinton a year ago in that election, and who are becoming older women. I mean, they're not going to be young forever, and they're voting, they're going to the polls, and they want a different set of politics out of the Democratic Party. They want the Democratic Party to come to terms with this cognitive dissonance of the Bill Clinton years and where we are today. I think it's in 2020, not just female candidates, but every Democratic candidate is going to have to answer for these kinds of questions.
All right, everybody stand by. There are new developments in the Russia investigation. We're going to get to that much more right after this quick break. We're back with our specialists. We're following some new and important developments in the Russia investigation, including a rather surprising joke delivered by the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. And Jeffrey, let me play the clip for you. He was over at the Mayflower Hotel, a well-known hotel here in Washington today. It was at that hotel he had an undisclosed meeting during the campaign with Sergei Kislyak, the then Russian ambassador to the United States. Listen to this.
But I just was thinking, you know, I should want to ask you, is Ambassador Kislyak in the room? Before I get started here, any Russians? Anybody been to Russia? Got a cousin in Russia or something.
It was a friendly audience, clearly. Lots of laughter, lots of applause. Was it appropriate?
Who am I to say, Wolf? I am not the Secretary of Appropriateness. I think it just agrees, it just shows that they're not taking this Russia investigation seriously. They think it's a big joke. I mean, all of them have made charitably false statements about their dealings with Russia. Sessions made incorrect, false statements. Jared Kushner keeps making over and over again false statements about his relationship with Russia, but they obviously don't care. And, you know, what consequences have they suffered so far? He's still Attorney General. Jared Kushner's still one of the most important people in the country, so why not laugh about it?
You know, it's interesting, Caitlin, because Jared Kushner is now facing more questions in the Senate Judiciary Committee, bipartisan, chairman, the ranking Democrat. They want more emails that he provided, including some emails he forwarded about WikiLeaks and what in that letter, Chairman Grassley, Dianne Feinstein, the ranking Democrat, in that letter they want emails about WikiLeaks and a Russian backdoor overture and dinner invite. By not providing all of that so far, previous examples as well, how much trouble is he in?
Well, there's a lot of selective memory from these administration officials over this, including Jeff Sessions, who left out his meetings with Sergei Kislyak on some of his forms and then had to go back. So that's a pretty bold joke for him to make. But Tubin's right. We've seen a lot of people in the administration make jokes like this. The president often makes jokes like that at rallies, asking if there's any Russians in the crowd. But back to this, we've seen Jared Kushner specifically leave a lot of information to be desired. Even after he speaks with some of these committees, they still want to know more. They want to have these emails, including the ones about Mike Flynn's firing and what happened there. And it's worth pointing out that Jared Kushner has been in this administration in a very senior position, and he still doesn't have his top security clearance yet, even though he's gone through all of this. And we've seen him time and time again leave off several meetings, and then after they're revealed by the media, then they go back and edit his form to put these things on there. So after, you know, one time you get a pass to say that you forgot a meeting, but then after 3 times and you keep having to amend all of these meetings and turn over more documents, you know, this is when you need to get it right the first time. This is a very serious investigation. And like Jeffrey said, it doesn't seem like the administration is taking it all that seriously right now.
But if your father-in-law is your boss, it's less of a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, to Jeffrey's point, if a regular old person was trying to get a security clearance in the federal government, these types of omissions would not be acceptable. You would not be able to go through, you know, half a dozen rounds of revisions of your documentations, omitting important meetings and omitting contacts with foreign nationals. You would not be able to do that. And so there's a little bit of a different standard here. And at the end of the day, I think, when we look at all of the omissions lined up, it does make you wonder, why weren't they more thorough? They have some very serious lawyers working on these things, working on this documentation. Why couldn't they get it all together or was it intentional? Were they waiting
Yeah.
for Congress and others to ask them for it?
Maybe when you're repeatedly not telling the truth, you're lying. I mean, that's a possibility, right? I mean, I think sometimes we should recognize the most obvious explanation is sometimes the true one.
So
if you keep not telling the truth, maybe it's because you're not telling the truth.
So is there a possible obstruction of justice case we're looking at?
Well, if Robert Mueller can establish that this was not a mistake over and over again, and it is not a crime to make mistakes in disclosures, but if there is evidence that Jared Kushner knew about these meetings and intentionally left them off, absolutely. The form itself, the form for the security clearance says on it that it's a crime to make intentionally false statements. So it's not like this is some mystery, but this is one reason why nepotism is not a great idea, because when the boss's daughter and son-in-law are principal advisors, they're not judged by the same standards as everyone else.
In addition to the subpoena from the Senate Judiciary Committee, there's also now a subpoena from the special counsel to the Trump campaign. They want a whole lot more documents as well.
Yeah, that's right. They want to know more information. We're kind of seeing the special counsel's investigation really expand and see that Bob Mueller knows a lot more than we do, because we see that come out with all of the indictments we've seen recently. Things like the Papadopoulos, for example. That was something that a lot of people had not seen coming, including a lot of the Trump officials, the former campaign officials, and now those who work in the White House. So we're really seeing this ramp up, and basically they just want to know more information.
You know, it's interesting that the former Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, in this interview with Russian TV says, he couldn't name all the Trump officials he met with within 20 minutes. I mean, there's so many of them that he met with. I don't know if he was simply trying to poke some fun or if he was serious. But if he's serious, that's a big issue.
Yeah, I mean, Sergei Kislyak has been known to be a little tongue-in-cheek about this particular situation in the past. But the broader point really is valid, which is that it is astonishing the degree to which people within the Trump orbit and people around the Trump campaign have had numerous contacts with Russians. The number of contacts is far more than they led people to believe. And now the goalposts are kind of changing. Now it's not, have we had contacts? It's, what is the definition of collusion exactly?
Yeah, all right, we got a lot more to discuss, and there's more news coming in as well. An internal fight over the Interior Secretary's questionable travels, what he isn't doing to help investigators.